A big hello to everyone. My name is Shireen Susan Idikla. I'm the Clinical Director of PlayStreet, Bangalore, India. I'm a speech and language therapist, a feeding therapist, as well as a movement therapist. PlayStreet is an organization that provides educational services to help the child with special needs reach his or her full potential. We offer parent empowerment programs, an integrated schooling program, and a variety of clinical services. Now, as part of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, which is the month of April, we wanted to bring to you pioneers in the field of autism and to guide us and kind of spread more awareness and knowledge. So today is our 8th talk, and our remarkable speaker for today is Miss Amy Brewis.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I honestly feel honored to be a part of this, and I'm so excited to share my passion with you all and this knowledge that I have, because I really am passionate about the work that I do and just helping kids and helping families as well.
So I'm just going to give a brief introduction about you now. Amy is a licensed brain gym instructor, consultant, and the owner of Brain Fundamentals, LLC. She holds a master's degree in education and has 18 plus years of elementary school teaching experience. Amy specializes in teaching executive primitive, reflex integration, and brain gym. Using a one-to-one movement-based program, Amy works with children that struggle with anxiety, autism, ADD or ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning challenges. Amy's passion is helping people understand how movement can affect learning and behavior and teaching ways to bring about positive change. It's really amazing to have you here today. I've been following your posts on the social media that you have. And so thank you so much for joining us on PlayStreet's Autism Hour. We hope you're doing well, and let's go to the questions. Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right. So today's conversation is all about the benefits of movement for learning. And so the first question I'm going to ask is, what is the Brain Fundamentals program and what are its components?
Okay, so the Brain Fundamentals program, like you said, Shireen, is, I work with kids one-on-one in their homes. And it's a movement-based program. So I am doing different movements pulled from different programs. Some of them are brain gym, rhythmic movement training. I use different developmental movements. I work with stuck energy in the body using something called the motion code and some tapping or emotional freedom technique. I use muscle checking, which is applied kinesiology, to help guide through the sessions. So it's really a program that's been compiled from a bunch of different programs. And I have to, in talking about this, I really have to give a shout out to Brain Fit Academy, because Brain Fit Academy is where I started my journey, and my amazing and wonderful mentor, Pam Formosa, just taught me so much. And so when I went off on my own to create Brain Fundamentals, I had such a solid foundation to go with. And I just, I really am so grateful to her and to Brain Fit Academy for getting me to where I am now.
All right, thank you for that. So, I love how you've taken components from different programs and put it together, and I can really relate to that. So could you explain the 3 parts of the brain in a simple way, because a lot of our viewers are not experts in this sense. So it would be easy for them to understand, if you can put it in a simplified way, to understand the importance of movement for learning during that first year of development of a child. And, what are these different kinds of movements?
Absolutely. And I actually have a visual, because we use a lot of visuals in my program. So this is the 3 parts of the brain. And this is a theory from a Dr. Paul MacLean. It's called the triune brain theory. And it's based on the fact that we have 3 major parts of the brain. And we've simplified it even more so that we refer to the brainstem here as the baby brain, the one in red. And then we have the emotional brain, the green, and then we have the thinking brain in blue. And we use those same terms with the kids because it really is simplified for them and for the parents. But basically, we think about these 3 parts of the brain. The brainstem is the first part of the brain to develop. So it develops in utero in the first year of life. It serves a couple of roles. All the sensory information that we bring in from all our senses, apart from the sense of smell, come into that brainstem. And ideally, as that sensory information comes in, it kind of integrates together like this tapestry to be able to go up to the higher centers of the brain. That's ideal, right? But sometimes what happens is that sensory information comes in and the brain doesn't know what to do with it. And as that information goes in, it goes up to that emotional brain, the middle part here. And the emotional brain's job is to say, wait, okay, hang on. Is this information safe? Is it comfortable? Do I feel okay with it? And if so, I'm going to send that information up to the thinking brain where I can process it at a higher level. If the emotional brain says, wait a minute, hold on, I don't like this, this is scary, it's threatening, it's something, a threat to my survival, right? A perceived threat to my survival, it's going to send that information right back down to the baby brain where we react to the information rather than respond in a more rational way. So the brain, those three parts of the brain really work together. And thinking about movement, right? The baby brain is built in that first year of life, and it's built upon what we call primitive reflexes. Okay, so primitive reflexes, and we're going to get into that a little later, but primitive reflexes are early movement motor patterns that all babies go through. They're there for survival. They're there to help us feel comfortable in our bodies. They're there to help develop postural, our postural reflexes and our posture and motor development and things like that. But so if that baby brain isn't well developed and have a good, strong, solid foundation, think of the roots of a tree or the base of a pyramid. If that baby brain is not well developed and strong, then all of the other parts aren't linking up properly and they're not as strong and as strengthened, and those connections between them are not as strong. And then we end up with all sorts of different behaviors and things that can happen because of that.
Okay. So we'll get right into that, what primitive reflexes. So you mentioned primitive reflex integration also in, it's part of your program, right? Primitive reflex integration.
Yes.
What is the reason for primitive reflexes not to get integrated? And how does it affect the voluntary and advanced movements later in life?
Okay, so primitive reflexes are those early motor patterns. So they're movement patterns, like I said, that are there for protection or to develop further movements and things like that, right? And so just to give you an example of one, so the moral reflex is the one where if you hold a baby on their back and you kind of drop them a little bit, they flail out, arms flail out, legs flail out, they take a deep breath, they cry, and then they come back in. That's the moral reflex, right? And so that's one of the reflexes that may not integrate. Now, as far as reasons for non-integration, there's a lot of things that could potentially happen, and nobody really knows for sure what could cause reflexes to not integrate. I'm going to give you some examples, but basically just to know that they can either not finish their integration, or we say integration, but really it just means finishing that motor pattern, working through that movement pattern so that the brain builds those connections up to the higher levels. So some of the reasons that we theorize, or different scientists and people who in this field theorize, is lack of movement as infants. We have a lot of, we call them container babies, where babies are moved from the floor to the car seat to the, shopping cart, and they're not moving as much as they were when 100 years ago. Sickness or trauma, either to the mother or the baby during pregnancy, during birth. Poor nutrition, either the baby or the mother, can affect it. Like I said, not enough floor time, not just movement, but floor time, tummy time. Babies need to be able to move, literally move their bodies through these reflexes in order to build those brain pathways. And if they're not moving as much, then they're not building the brain. And, one of the things we talked a lot about in my program is there's no judgment here. I did the same thing with my own kids. I had them in the container. So I didn't know at the time, I had them in the containers and the car seats and all of that. And I look back in pictures, and when they weren't in there, they were in one of those seats that sits on the table and kind of bounces. I didn't have them I had them on the floor, but not nearly as much as I should have. And so if the babies aren't moving, like I said, they're not moving through these motor patterns, then the more voluntary and advanced movements can't take over because they haven't built the initial brain pathways that are needed. And so it really, think about the reflexes as like controlling the body like a puppeteer, right? So the reflexes are triggered by something. The motor reflex, like I mentioned, is triggered by sensory input, like light, sounds, a wet diaper, you know, a loud noise, that sort of thing. If you have an older child whose motor reflex is not integrated, they're going to respond to those same things, and their body's going to respond in those same kind of patterns. And if you know what you're looking for, you see them. And that's what's so interesting too. But the brain is working so hard to fight those reflexive movement patterns that they don't have the brain power left to do other things that they might be doing otherwise.
Right. So, and that makes all movements later that are supposed to develop, it kind of just takes a stop. Okay.
Exactly.
Lovely explanation. Now, what's the connection between rhythmic movements and primitive reflexes?
Okay, so babies naturally go through rhythmic movements. They do rhythmic movements on their own. If you think of a baby who starts to crawl, they get up on all fours and they start to rock back and forth on their bum, right? They kind of sit back and they sit. That's a rhythmic movement that babies are doing naturally. And so these natural movements help to stimulate the sensory systems. They help to stimulate different parts of the brain, and they integrate those reflexes as well. And they're linking up. That's part of the movement that babies do naturally to help link up the parts of the brain. And so in my program, we use some of those rhythmic movements. I use a couple different programs, but rhythmic movement training is a program that I use movements from. And it helps to go back and do some of those movements that babies would have done as a baby, or kids would have done as a baby, and then help to integrate the reflexes and link up those parts of the brain.
Right. Okay. So there is definitely a close connection between rhythm and movement and what we need in life, right? Okay. So most of our children with autism, they are running, they're jumping, they're, flapping, they're doing all kinds of gross motor movements. You see them in the playground, they're able to use the playground, right? So we say that they have good motor skills. But at the same time, we've also heard that autism is a movement disorder. And that's where the crux of the difficulty is. So why do we say that when they have these gross skills, what kind of fundamental movements which are missing in children with autism?
So what's interesting is I had never heard, that's new to me, that autism has been referred to as a movement disorder. And I don't know if that's something in your part of the world. So that was interesting to me that it is referred to as a movement disorder in some aspects. For me, it's actually, the way I look at it, it's not so much that they're missing movements, it's that their movements are still there. Those reflexes are still present in the body. So those automatic reflexive movements are still there, right? So like I said, each reflex is triggered by something. So if we think about, there's another reflex called the ATNR, it's the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. It's triggered by the turn of a head. So if the child turns their head, their arm would go out like this leg on the same side straightens and the other one flexes, okay? So, and then if they turn their head this way, it reverses. So it's these movement patterns are still there in the body versus what's missing. And so, we think about kids, and a lot of kids that I work with have good gross motor skills, but when you start to look at them a little deeper and you look at those motor patterns of the reflexes, and when you know what you're looking for, you see them. Like I always say, I see them everywhere now. Once I learned, I can look at kids on a playground and know that kid has this one and that reflex. I can see it in kids. Right. And so, but looking at them more deeply, we most, even though they're running around on the playground, do they have issues with balance, their vestibular system, their proprioceptive input there, like where do I know where my body is in space and how much force to use and pressure and things like that. Those sensory systems, the tactile system, the balance, which is the vestibular system, the proprioceptive system, all of those are affected by the reflexes. So when we look at at those systems as well, it can give us clues, because more often than not, when kids have unintegrated reflexes, those sensory systems are also underdeveloped. And other issues that we might see, coordination, like what's the coordination in a child? They may be on the playground, but are they able to, coordinate their body to manage that? The ability to cross the midline of the body, right? We have that imaginary midline. Are they crossing that midline comfortably and easily with their hands, their feet, and all of that? Fight, flight, freeze reactions. Those are the Moro and another reflex called the fear paralysis. Those two reflexes are the fight, the flight, and the freeze. That's sympathetic nervous system. So do we see those behaviors in these kids, even though they may have good gross motor skills? When they come across something that's a little tricky or difficult, do they freeze or do they run away? Or so all of these things point to unintegrated reflexes. In my book, when I'm looking at them, that's what I see. And then I start to look deeply at those reflexes and see what's, again, not what's missing, but what's still there. What patterns are still there in the body and the brain.
Okay, and this is so important for parents, especially the parents, to really understand, because, when we generally talk about movement, this is the thing, but they can run, they can jump, they can do all these things. So there shouldn't be a problem, right? Why aren't they getting the rest of it? And especially as a speech therapist, what happens, the speech gets affected and they can't understand why that fine motor coordinated activity like speech is getting affected. So when you actually go back to the crux of it, you're like, wait, the body is affected. And if you want to get fine motor coordination, you got to work on that body a lot more. Right?
Yeah. And removing those reflexive patterns help with that, right? So that the brain is freed up to then develop those fine motor skills of speech, of handwriting, all of that kind of stuff.
Right, right. Beautiful. Okay, so we wanted to understand a little bit more the concept of brain gym. So what kind of movements does this program provide, and what areas of learning does this program help in? So, what kind of changes would we see in our children's movement, or, is there problem-solving patterns that basically will, the higher brain functions can be, like you say, freed up. Can you free up the movements so that the higher brain function is in place? Is that what Brain Gym helps with?
Yeah, Brain Gym helps with all of that. And so when I use Brain Gym, so Brain Gym is the base of the program is 26 specially designed movements, and their related techniques. It was developed by a Dr. Paul Dennison and his wife and partner, Gail Dennison, in the 1970s. It's used in over 80 countries around the world. It's very well known across the world. And it addresses the physical components of learning. So it addresses the visual, the auditory, the motor, and the stress management as well. But what it does is it really helps in all areas of learning, because it's helping to reduce the stress, reduce that Moro, the fight, flight, freeze responses. It does help to integrate the reflexes. And it helps us to use both sides of our brain more effectively, because when we have the left and the right hemisphere working together well, then we're able to approach learning more easily and access those higher level thinking in the brain. I use Brain Gym in conjunction with primitive reflex integration. So it's a big piece of my program. But I don't use it solely by itself. Usually it's in conjunction with a lot of things. But, some of the changes that I see with kids, and I'm going to talk about a child that I work with that, has been in my program for a few years now. And we've just seen amazing changes. He started with, just he had no idea where his body was in space. He couldn't cross the midline. He had a lot of difficulty even following directions to do any of the movements. We had his mother and I really had to do a lot of hand over hand and just helping to guide his body through the movements, because his motor planning just wasn't there. His speech, he's verbal, but his the complexity of his speech has made amazing changes, and the way that he will now ask questions versus, saying, just repeating something, or that, that repetitive speech he would start. And so he just really expanded in so many ways, and let that problem solving skills you mentioned, like thinking about reaching those higher centers of the brain. Yes, Brain Gym absolutely can help us reach them. But I feel like in conjunction with the primitive reflexes, especially with kids who are more severely on the autism spectrum, because they're really, if I, looking at those kids, those reflexes are at that baseline. And in order to access some of the Brain Gym activities effectively, they need their reflexes to be integrated as well. So working in it all together in conjunction we can see some really amazing changes in all of those things, problem solving and stress management and all of that, self-regulation and all of that.
Wow. So that's exactly what, we want to put out there, the message that we want to put out there, that it's so important to have this concept of movement in the everyday. And it's not just about those gross skills that you think that the child has, but so much more to it, right?
Yes.
So lovely. Okay, so there are some more components, and you mentioned this earlier also about the Brain Fundamentals program, which is the energy systems that you mentioned earlier, and emotion codes. Could you kind of help us understand what that means, and does that help children develop co-regulation or self-regulation?
Yes. So there's energy systems in the body that are from Chinese medicine called the meridians.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know some people may be familiar with meridians, and I'm surprised there are a lot of people who are not familiar with meridians. So I like to give a little example, but basically it's, think of like imaginary lines of energy that are just flowing through our body, right? And we can work with those meridians to move stuck energy in the body. And so acupuncture is one of those, modalities that works with those meridians. They use needles, and acupuncturists use needles. I use acupressure, which is just tapping on certain things. That's the emotional freedom technique. It's a piece of my program. It is not a huge part of my program. I have simple tapping spots that I teach the kids that they can use on their own. But the idea is that we're moving stuck energy, and that energy may be in the form of emotions, because emotions are energy, just like everything else. And that's where emotion code comes in. And that's another program that I use. But basically it's finding and releasing emotions that are stuck in the body and moving them along. And then, like I said, the tapping. But anytime there's stuck energy in the body, it can affect us emotionally, physically, all of that, because when the energy gets stuck, it's more likely to feel the emotions that might be stuck, first of all. And we just can't, the energy is not flowing. And so we have to get it flowing again. And when we do that, we see changes. And it does help with self-regulation and co-regulation, because when kids learn these techniques, and it might be as simple as just tapping right here, and so they can do this to help calm their body, or parents can do it for them or with them. Sometimes a lot of kids will need it kind of hand over hand, and I'm tapping for them. But once they know the spot, they may start to even request it, or we might do this one, right? And they may request it and I would do it for them, or they start to learn how to do it for themselves. And really that goes for all of the movements that I do with kids. I teach the parents as well. Oftentimes the parents are with me in sessions, and I will teach them certain movements. I will teach the kids movements, and then they start to use them to regulate themselves, and parents regulate with them as well. And I always tell the parents, do it with them. Don't just say, go honey, and you go do that movement. Let's do it together. Right. And so they start to do it together with the parents, and then they are, working on that self-regulation and co-regulation using all of the movements.
It's just, opens up more possibilities of what children need. So if I understand it right, you have Brain Gym as a component in there, you have primitive reflex integration as a component there, you have EFT as a component in there. Are there more components that you put together?
Emotion code is one of them. Yeah, emotion code is another program in itself that I use. Yeah. And then other developmental movements that have been pulled from different, that just movements that babies go
Rhythmic
through.
movement training also that you incorporate.
The rhythmic movement training, yeah. And then other just various developmental movements and assisted type movements that come. There's deeper brain gym movements that I use as well, because brain gym goes beyond that 26 movements. That's kind of the base of the program. But as you get deeper into brain gym, you learn all sorts of other types of movements. And so there's a lot pulled from the deeper brain gym work as well that I use as well. So.
All right. Okay, so I wanted to come to what's the effect of having uncoordinated, underdeveloped, restricted movement patterns for our children, especially for their social and communication abilities?
So those unintegrated reflexes, like I mentioned, lead to immaturities in the brain, right? And they can show up in a lot of different ways. And depending on the reflex and the reflex that's unintegrated, it can have a lot of different things. So just to kind of give you a sense of some of the things that affects that communication and social abilities. So the fear paralysis and the moro, as I mentioned, and the fight, flight, freeze. So those can affect, anxiety, poor adaptability, obsessive type traits, constant feelings of overwhelm, sensory input overload, difficulty focusing, which all of those, of course, would affect social and communication, because if your body's in a fight, flight, freeze, it's not available for learning. It's not available to engage with the kid next to them. It's not available to engage with the adult that's in the room. So that's kind of at the core of, a lot of kids. And then there's other reflexes. The TLR, which is the tonic labyrinthine, can affect sequencing, telling of stories and jokes, poor sense of time. So all of that, of course, and if you have a child who's trying to tell a story of something that happened to them, if they're not able to sequence the events, that's going to affect that communication and how they're talking to somebody, because the person won't necessarily understand what they're saying, right? Or understand the story because they're not sequencing it correctly. Difficulty processing verbal conversations is related to the spinal galant reflex. Auditory processing is also related to the spinal galant reflex, which is another reflex. So it's this domino effect, right? So these reflexes aren't integrated, which then affects the social communication, the behavior, and all of that. And then we're not able to get to those higher level centers of the brain. And it just can affect kids in so many ways. And so when you go, it's really like that root of the behavior. It's the root cause of so many things. And when I first learned about this, I was really in awe of that, because I didn't realize, as a teacher and as a mom, my youngest son has autism as well. And so it was, I never knew about reflexes or reflex integration or what it was. And when I started working on my own son went through the Brain Fit Academy program, and that's how I learned about all this, or started with it. Just seeing the changes and looking at okay, this makes a whole lot of sense, why he can't do that. It was this reflex that was connected to it, and so the changes can be really profound. It's not a cure-all, but it definitely can make some profound changes in kids with all sorts of learning challenges and autism and all of that.
That is so awesome, because as a speech therapist, right, we never taught any of these things. We're not taught that there's such a connection like this. And it gives, I think even professionals, especially in my field, should open up their minds to learn more about this, because if this, like you said, the foundation is not in, we're not going to get what, as speech therapists, we want: the communication, the speech, and all of, the sequencing, all of that we work on. None of that is going to come if you have those primitive reflexes still there. So exactly. It's so important, even for professionals to know, and especially parents, because again, it is not done all the time. I would say looking at primitive reflexes, whether it's integrated, we all go into the skill. No, he doesn't do this. Okay, let's work on that. Oh, he doesn't do that. Oh, let's work on that. She's having this. Let's go work on that. Right. So we just work on the skill and we forget the foundation altogether.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we say it's like playing whack-a-mole, you know, that game when you go,
Yeah.
you know, and you're like, you got this one, I got that one, I got that one. But really, where is the problem? It's the base, right? And
Right.
so working at that base level, the brainstem level, literally at the brainstem level, and taking advantage of that neuroplasticity. You know, I think that there was a, you know, we had talked about or mentioned at one point about like how long can we do this for? You know, what age can we, you know, still make progress? I worked on my reflexes as an adult and made progress. I was in, you know, when 5-6 years ago, I was in fear paralysis. I would freeze every time. I would never have done anything like this. I can tell you that 6 years ago, never would have done anything like this. And here I am now with confidence and, you know,
Totally.
and all of that, you know, so you can, the brain is plastic and scientists know and recognize that now. At one point that wasn't the case, but now we know that is, and we can change the brain at any time and go back and work on these reflexes at any time and see changes.
Amazing. Because again, you know, sometimes when the children go older, the parents are like, there's nothing really to be done, or I'm still looking at one aspect, just the everyday daily life. As long as he's happy or she's happy, that's enough. But it gives us so much of hope that, you know what, there is still that can be changed in the foundation at whatever age, and that's not a problem at all. I love that, because I mean, I get, this is the question I get a lot of the times, and that my child is turning 5. After 5, is he going to stop learning? And I'm like,
Right.
why? Who would say that to you? Why would anyone say that to you? And again, unfortunately, it's the professionals also who say that after 5, brain plasticity goes down. You won't be the child one, so you have to work on it now. And they are under so much of stress. The parents are under so much of stress, because of which the child is under so much of stress to perform. And it's just so dysregulated. The bond between the parent and the child just gets so dysregulated that they're not able to do anything. So it's so important for everyone to understand the neuroplasticity of the brain, and that the brain can learn at any age. And that's not going to be a problem. And, you know, the question when they ask me this is like, if you learn a new language, would you be able to learn it now? Or if you wanted to go learn a new dance form, don't you think you'd still be able to learn it? Would you be like, no, I can't do it at all? Right. So it's really connects to a lot of the things that I talk also to parents. And I love this conversation, because it's just for me reinforcing that, okay, I was also on the right track. I'm good. I'm good to go. I'm feeling more confident now about myself too after this. So we had discussed also, if you could show us some movements that parents could do with their children at home, just something simple they could start with. I think then the takeaway from this conversation would be a lot more beneficial. So would you be willing to?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
So I'm going to show you a couple of brain gym movements, and then I'm going to show you another movement that we use that's not brain gym, but I think is very, very good, especially for kids with autism specifically. So hookups is one from brain gym, and I'm going to show you sitting, but it really can be done standing. It can be done lying down. And so we go thumbs up, thumbs down, and then cross your hands and link them together and bring them up to your chest. And then one foot crosses over the other at the ankle. And your tongue goes to the roof of your mouth, like where you would click. So think about that spot, and you're going to hold your tongue there. Now, we're just going to hold there for a minute, and then I'm going to give you a couple varieties of this. And as we're doing this, take some nice deep breaths. And then I like to switch and go the other way. I feel like your other hand, so you go thumbs down again, or thumbs up, thumbs down, and cross the other hand over the top. Feels a little weird when you first start doing it. And then the other foot goes on top, and hold that position again with your tongue. I like to do both ways. I feel more even that way. I think it helps connect both sides of the brain really well. And just tongue at the roof, and just some nice deep breaths again. And then the second part of hookups You just put your fingers together, fingertips together like this. And you can feel, sometimes you can feel a pulse in your fingertips, sometimes not. But it's just, even just holding your fingers together like this is a nice mindful activity. Sometimes I have the kids tap their fingers or tap one finger at a time. That can actually be very tricky for some to isolate the fingers, especially if their palmar reflex is not integrated. That's another reflex. And then at the end, I just say, put your brain back on. We pretend like this is our two sides of our brain coming together. And we make a cool sound like, or something like that.
Lovely.
And so the one thing that some kids that just finding that motor pattern of crossing and bringing it up, some kids definitely might need some hand over hand to help find that motion, especially if they are not able to cross the midline or come to midline with their body very easily. But again, it can be done lying down. So that takes the balance out of it, because if I was standing and having to have one leg over the other, that requires some balance, but you can have them lie down. Sometimes the tongue at the roof of the mouth can be a little tricky, and I will play a game. I call it pass the click, where I'll have them just make a click sound like that. And then I will do like, and they repeat me, right? And they just back, and it helps, because really what we're trying to do is stimulate that spot at the roof of the mouth. It's an acupressure point. And so when we're clicking, it's stimulating it. So it's not, the same as putting it up there, but if the child has difficulty with it, it's a way to help that progression to be able to do that on their own. Okay.
Great. And simplified it. I love how you simplified some more, because generally when we start a movement, parents get like, but my child is not able to do any of this, so where would we start? So I love how you simplified it. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. And hookups are very calming. So if you think about, again, the Moro response, right? When we are in Moro and fight flight, the blood is pumping to our extremities to get ready to fight or to flee, like to run away. When we do hookups, we're drawing that attention back to the core of our body, and we're sending this message to our brain, like, I'm safe, it's okay, and I can be here and be centered and be okay. So that's what hookups does. So it's a very calming one. And things. The next one is also a brain gym activity. It's called the thinking cap. This was actually my son's favorite. And just thinking, just to give everybody what you were saying about, like, the neuroplasticity. My son did this program in primitive reflex integration at age 13. He was not a little one when he did this. He was 13 when he went through the program. He's 16 now, is doing great, and is in school and, in traditional school and all that. So the thinking cap it's basically like an ear massage. I'm going to give you a little close up of my ear for a second here. So you're starting at the top of the ear, and it's like you're unrolling the cartilage in your ear. Okay. Now you can do this with both hands at the same time, and you're just starting from the inside and just like unrolling that cartilage nice and slow, working your way down the ear, all the way down to the earlobe. Okay, this can be done. Kids can do this on their own. You can do it for them. So like you can stand kind of behind them or next to them and do it, or in front of them even, and do it for them. Again, very calming. It releases tension in the neck. It releases tension along the jawline. But this was one of my son's favorites when he first working. Anytime he would start to kind of dysregulate, I would say, let's do thinking caps. Let's do thinking caps. And it would always bring him down. Generally, I do them 3 times. You can be done more. One of the things with my program is I always tell kids, we're going to do this for as long as you would like. So sometimes we would do a movement for 10 seconds, and sometimes we do it for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. It depends on the child, and if it's feeling good for them, then that means their body needs it, and we're going to continue with it. So letting the kids really guide the sessions and guide the movements, and going by what their body wants and needs at the time. All right. And the last one, this is not a brain gym movement, but we call it squeezies. And I'm going to just adjust my camera for a minute. I'm going to use this is Chloe, my doll. I use her to help demonstrate some things. So let me just tip my my camera down here. Okay. So squeezies is providing deep pressure into the muscles and joints. So thinking about that proprioceptive system and how kids with underdeveloped reflexes often have an underdeveloped proprioceptive system. And so what you're going to do is we always start at the core of the body. So I'm going to start at her, like kind of at her shoulder, and it's just deep pressure with the arms, nice and like nice firm pressure, as firm as the child will tolerate. And then I'm gonna I move down slowly down the arm, holding it for 2 or 3 seconds so the body can really feel that, right, and have time to process it, going right down to the fingertips. Okay, right down to the very fingers. And then I would do the same on the other arm. And then I would go down to the legs, same thing, starting at the core of the body and working out, and just squeeze and hold it there, slowly working down the leg. Obviously, you know, she's not very tall, so it doesn't take me very long if you've got a child, you know, all the way down to the toes, right? Shoes off. We do most, you know, all of our work. Shoes off. You can have socks off, but we always do our work with shoes off, and then we would do the other side. And then I would flip them over, have them lay on their belly and do the same thing down the back sides of their arms or legs. And I even come across the back and just give some pressure along the sides like that as well. And then going down the arms and legs on the back as well. That, you know, that is a favorite of kids. They love it because it's really just bringing in that deep pressure and helping kids. If you think about a weighted blanket, how many kids like weighted blankets, right? It does that same, gives that same kind of effect, or that squeezing kind of effect, hugging, right? Kids that love that proprioception, or kids that love to wrap themselves in blankets or like the weighted blankets, they love squeezies because it gives that same pressure, because their bodies aren't feeling that input as well as other kids. So when you do it nice and strong and deep, they feel it more. And so it's calming for them and calming to the nervous system.
Is there like again here when you're doing it, because it was a smaller baby as such, right?
Yes.
But can you do this for older children, 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds too?
Absolutely. Okay. Yep. Even adults.
Okay, even adults. Would they, you know, if they like the proprioception, they'll stay for it. Now, if the child didn't like it, you wouldn't, I'm guessing, try this technique at all, and you would try to bring something else in?
I would. So if they are really avoiding the proprioceptive pressure, it's still because their proprioceptive system is underdeveloped. So kids whose proprioceptive or vestibular systems are underdeveloped, they're either going to overseek the input or they're going to underseek the input, right? So they're either going to avoid the input or they're going to be seeking for it all the time. Both point to that system being underdeveloped. And so what I would do instead is I would start with less pressure. So I might start with, if the child really was not wanting to do it, I would start with just placing my hands on their arm and just moving down and asking them, how does that feel? Is that okay? Like, and if they can tolerate that. Or I might use like a stress ball, a squeezy ball, and I might just roll that on their arms and their legs. So still giving them some of that proprioceptive input, but just in a less firm way. And then eventually, as their system, and if you're working on the reflexes at the same time, as their system starts to develop more, they'll be able to tolerate it more, because their system will be able to appropriately distinguish the input.
Right. So in terms of when you do your program, right, how soon would you be able to see changes in children? I know every child is different. I understand that concept completely. But like, how soon could you start seeing changes in children?
Within a few sessions.
Within a few sessions. All right.
I'll just give you a very recent example. I had a little boy that I just started working with him. I saw him, he's not autistic, but he is very much has issues with the moral reflex, very, very sensitive to any kind of sounds, lights, all of that. Would only wear the same clothes, you know, so sensitive to clothing and the touch of clothing and textures and all that. Same outfit every single day. Like his mother literally washed the outfit every day, and he would rewear the same things the next day. I worked with him for 3 sessions. We worked on the Moro and the fear paralysis reflex. And within 3 sessions, his family went on vacation, and his mother texted me and a picture of him in a bathing suit at the beach, and said that he has been wearing a new outfit every day that they've been on vacation. He hasn't done that for as long as she can remember.
Wow.
So yeah. And again, every child's different, but yes, as early as, a few sessions. And I want to add that the family has been great about follow up at home, and they're doing the movements that I've, requested them to do. And so that helps. There is such a thing as too much of this work, because it can be overstimulating, but, I give parents a home program that is, 5 minutes a night. It doesn't need to be a long period of time, but just doing some movements to help further along the progress, so that it's not just when I see them, because I typically see kids every week, but I only see them for an hour a week. So, there does need to be some home, but yes, it really can take place very quickly.
Right. And actually you answered the question I was going to ask in terms of, I wanted to ask, how long will they do it at home, or how long do you do it? So actually for you, you said you have a 1-hour session with them, right?
Yes.
Generally a week. So is it all movement, or do you mix other things in? How does your program generally go?
It's all based on movement, but we do, like, kind of our movement is work, rest, and play, we call it. So the work part is the movements that I have, like I have cards for each reflex, and we kind of go off of that. But then I also have folders with other movements in them, and we use those. But then I play with the kids, but the play is based on the reflex that we're working on. So I play with toys, and I bring specific toys that will help to integrate that reflex. So, for example, like if you think about, I know I'm using the Moro as an example a lot, but it's an easy one to talk about. And sensory input, right? So loud sounds. So when I'm working on the Moro with a child, I will bring a toy that makes a loud sound. I have different toys that will make a loud pop or bang or a jump or things like that. So when we're working on the reflex, we're playing and we're bringing joy and entertainment and fun into that session, but all within the context of working on that reflex. And when a brain is in joy, when a child or a person is in joy, changes happen faster. And so it's just, that's all part of it. And then the rest is our quieter movements. So the kids, I would give them a quiet toy, and they might be lying on the floor, or they might be sitting up, and I'm doing some movements like I do something called spinal walk up their back, or I might sit behind them and do thinking caps, or I'm doing quieter movements or some of those rhythmic movements, and they may be playing quietly, or they're just lying there and enjoying it. But it's all movement, but it is in different ways, and really getting the kids active and moving and working through those reflexes and making it fun. I mean, one of my things is, I call my company Brain Fundamentals, because I love to make the work fun, and I have a lot of fun with the kids. I really enjoy it, and they enjoy it, and they're saying, I can't wait for Amy to come back. They love it. And the parents love it because they see changes, and the kids see changes, and I see changes, and it's just really
exactly amazing. If it's fun, like you said, if it's fun, the changes will be much faster. Exactly. And unfortunately, a lot of times professionals and parents get lost in the doing of a program. They'll go, do. I just need to kind of do it and finish it off, kind of a thing. And they lose touch with the fun factor. And that's something we are constantly trying to tell parents, if you have fun with them, they'll have fun with you. You'll be able to do a lot more. And it need not be that 2 minutes and them running away from you, but you could get a lot more time with them. Yeah, right. Absolutely. And you said only 5 minutes at home. Is that what you meant? So the parents just need to do it for 5 minutes every day, and
it depends on the child. It honestly depends on the child. But generally, generally that's about 5 to 10 minutes maximum. I mean, it really depends, but I don't give them a lot of homework. It depends on how well the child is progressing. The thing is, like I said, it can be overstimulating. And there's differing opinions on this. Some people who do reflex integration will say it has to be done 15 to 20 minutes every day. I don't find that. And I have actually found the opposite. I had a family once who started with me, and they were doing some reflex integration through somebody else as well. And I said to them, just be mindful that if I'm doing it and then you're doing it at home and you're doing it with this other person, it may be too much for his system. And she was like, okay. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, he started having meltdowns and all these tantrums. And I was like, remember when I said that? And she was like, oh yeah, that's right. And they backed off, and he went back to kind of a baseline of just a nice progression of success and changes. So that's where I stand on it. Like I said, every child is different, but I generally don't give them a ton of movement. And I want to say this too, that's a scheduled time, right? As I mentioned, I teach the kids the movements, and yes, I want them to work them into other parts of their day. But as far as like doing it at a scheduled time, like at bedtime, we're going to do these movements, that's that 5 or 10 minutes. Other times it's just, oh, you're noticing that you're getting kind of stressed out. Let's do a hookup together. Or, you know what I mean? Or you're noticing for your child that, and you're going to do some of the movements with them, that sort of thing. But that's how I work it anyway.
Okay, that's lovely advice, because yes, like you said, there's so many programs who say, do this 40 minutes, 45 minutes, make the child sit down, do this, do that. And one, it's overwhelming for the parents a lot of the times. Oh my God, I have to do so much. This therapist has given me this work, that therapist has given me, and I can see that the parent is overwhelmed. And when the parent is overwhelmed, the child gets overwhelmed, and then it's just, a bad situation. So I love that it, be careful, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be done constantly through the day, and when they need it is something that really would help their awareness of when are they getting dysregulated, and when do they need to do these things, right? Awesome. And that comes to the end of all our questions. So on behalf of our team PlayStreet, I really like to thank you, Amy, for your valuable time and sharing your knowledge with us. And for all the viewers, I really hope you're able to understand the importance of really looking at movement as the base, as the foundation for all kinds of learning. And when you look at gross skills, it's not just the cross skills that you're looking at, but the coordinated time sequence movements that your child might or might not have, due to which they might have learning difficulties later or movement difficulties later. So we really wanted to bring this knowledge to all of you, that movement is so important, and not to just work on a superficial layer, but get deep into what's really happening. Because if you don't, you're going to get frustrated without the results. The child is going to get frustrated because they lose their sense of competence, that I don't think I can do this. And then they start developing that more of, I want to run away from it all the time. So it's so important to just connect the relationship, the fun factor all the time, along with movement and consciousness, to look at the child at a deeper level and really help them be the best versions of themselves. So I hope today you've all gotten more ideas from Amy, and she's given some really lovely practical ideas that you could try at home. And I hope you can put together some strategies to help our children take these small, successful steps every day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Take care, and bye-bye.
Thank you.